Our conversation is with Mr. Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was the, and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean?
The main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him.
Demoralisation is essential for the reprogramming of ideals. Cultists know you cannot reprogram someone that is confident and has a strong sense of self, which is why they first try to break down a new member before attempting to reprogram. Interrogators use the same technique. You must get the target to lose all sense of hope before they will betray their ideals, friends or family. They will tell them that everything they believe in was a lie, that their sense of self is evil or lacking in moral character. Likewise, to subvert nations you must first demoralise it before it will betray its ideals and sense of history. So how do you demoralise proud nations whose history is steeped in a rich array of cultural achievements? How do you get them to accept revolutionary change? Well, you need to find a way of diminishing that pride. If I was going to demoralise a person, for example, I might try to find a physical or personality flaw and keep mentioning it until it gradually grinded away at their self-confidence. Once the people of a nation see their identity as utterly worthless, the population becomes susceptible to change. One technique employed by Marxists is to focus on areas such as colonisation, where some Western countries occupied other countries for a relatively short period of time in history. Here the West are portrayed as aggressors, barbarians, suppressors of freedom. Even though all the other nations at the time were involved in tribal fighting, it serves the point of promoting a sense of shame. If this doesn't work, they try the slavery route. For the last 40 years the left has focused on the West's brief entry into the slave trade. Western nations are portrayed as barbarians who raped and pillaged weaker nations in the world. The West was selfish capitalists who enslaved the world and exploited the innocent for a material gain. Of course, they forget to mention Africa already had institutionalized slavery well before the Europeans arrived, and they forget to mention slavery was rife in Islamic countries who imported Africans by their tens of millions, far more than a few 100,000 taken by Europeans. Of course, in reality slavery was a worldwide phenomenon, but this knowledge is suppressed for obvious reasons. Marxists have their sights fixed firmly on the richer European nations.
So the next stage is destabilization.
During the 1960s, feminism was introduced to the West via the Marxist principle that gender is a social construct. Marxist professors have worked tirelessly to indoctrinate impressionable students into ignoring hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary biology in favour of the notion that we are completely programmable. The biological desire for a woman to have children was put down to social expectations of a patriarchal society, not biological programming built up from millions of years of evolution. Furthermore, women were told to compete with men, and this broke the symbiotic relationship that had existed for millions of years. Men provided and protected, women nurtured the family unit, and together they fulfilled the legacy of rearing the next generation. With this notion being accepted, the population decline was inevitable, and of course, this is exactly what was planned. To encourage demographic change further, in the 1970s when the population of the West was still above replacement levels, leftist activists told the populations they needed to lower birth rates to lower the burden on the planet. The result was Western European countries lowered birth rates whilst all the others continued to increase. Then 2 decades later, these same people told us we needed to import people from diverse cultures from around the world to sustain our decrease in populations. The result was the West loses its sense of self. What does it now mean to be British, Italian or German? The idea promoted now is that these countries are just pieces of land with no ethnic identity, and of course with that identity goes the history of that people. To no longer be able to take pride in the achievements of your ancestors for fear of showing a sense of racial or ethnic pride is all part of the demoralisation process. Of course, the left anticipated the rejection of this planned migration. We are, after all tribal in nature, and we are programmed to have a natural in-group preference. So they exploited this in-group preference by attaching it to a weakness in human beings, the desire to be seen as good and virtuous people. If you objected to this reorganisation of society, they would label you as far-right, hateful and uncaring, and society would be encouraged to turn their back on you. It's a tactic that was tried and tested during the Bolshevik takeover of Russia, and it thus became part of the Chinese Revolution, and now it's standard practice on the left.
In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters to all communists in the United States. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."
So yes, even 100 years ago this tactic was being employed by Marxists, and indeed, who now would argue it is the foundation of political correctness. To overturn society and rebuild it, they need to shut down all opposition. When Hitler and Mussolini grew in prominence, the first thing they did was to take over the media. Control the media and you can distort people's sense of reality through propaganda. There are 2 ways you can do this. Firstly, you can forcibly take over the media, but this requires you to be in some position of power. Alternatively, you can infiltrate the media and turn reporters into activists. To do the latter, all you need to do is infiltrate the universities, the training ground of journalists. Here is a clip from the Rubin Report where Janice Flamengo describes her university indoctrination.
So in a weird way, this is a case of where the university original mission of being a place to find truth and giving people the opportunity to think about these issues, debate these issues, etc., has taken a complete 180, because now it seems to be the breeding ground for the opposite of those ideas.
It is a breeding ground, for sure. I mean, it's where all of the indoctrination takes place, and then, of course, the students who are indoctrinated go out into all the major spheres of our society. They go to law school where they read critical legal theory that tells them that there's nothing unbiased or objective about the legal system that we have in North America, that it needs to be completely remade. They become journalists and they go to journalism school where they learn the same thing, and they're told that a journalist should be somebody who attempts to improve and change society, make it better, rather than just report what's happening. They become teachers. They go into the education faculties where they're also being radicalized, and so it's not surprising that this is where we're at now.
The next stage, of course, is crisis. And after crisis, you have so-called the period of normalization.
The initiation of crisis has primarily come from the impact of uncontrolled immigration. People are concerned about their replacement, and there's a genuine fear over the effect of Islamic immigration. Democracy is struggling to represent so many interest groups, and it is showing signs of deterioration. The left have taken the side of minority groups and worked tirelessly to create division, as they always have done, but this time they are now backed up by an activist media who are attempting to normalise what is happening. The militant Antifa are working hard to shut down opposition through violence. To compound the problem, people's wages have been suppressed due to an oversupply of cheap labour. The cost of housing has rocketed due to a need to house these immigrants, and this is fueling the feeling of resentment as the present generation face the reality of much lower living standards than their parents. A massive burden has been placed on the welfare state as many of these migrants fail to find work and fail to integrate. The high birth rates of these migrants ensures many countries face major demographic change, increasing the tribalisation of society. At the same time, the left mercilessly use minority groups to make any objection to planned migration a racist act or a claim for white supremacy. All the time the left uses planned breakdown of society as a reason to introduce hate speech laws, gradually eroding freedom of speech to a point where no one will be able to legally object or criticise future government policy. As society and the economy continue to erode, they will eventually instigate a police state in the name of bringing law and order back to society. At that point, there will be no turning back.